Hello, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk, a series from Gift of Life Michigan that explores how lives are changed by organ and tissue donation. We answer your questions about donation and help you find ways to learn more and get involved. I'm Patrick Wells O'Brien, Chief Communications Officer here at Gift of Life Michigan. We have a great show today. We'll be discussing the 50th anniversary of Gift of Life Michigan and some of the life-saving innovations over the past 50 years. If you are viewing us on the replay or live, we encourage you to like and share this video with your friends. Please post your questions in the comment section. We'll look for those and answer your questions. Or if you simply have a comment and want to wish us a happy 50th anniversary, we welcome that too. Today's guests include Bruce Nicely, Chief Clinical Officer at Gift of Life Michigan, and Dr. Chris Sonnenday, Transplant Center Director at the University of Michigan, Michigan Medicine. But first, we welcome Gift of Life Michigan's CEO, Dorrie Dils. Welcome, Dorrie. How are you?
Good afternoon, Patrick. Doing well.
So Gift of Life Michigan is 50 years old, and we've had a lot involved with our celebration. And one of the things that we thought we would start off today's show with is to have you kind of react to our 50th anniversary and give your comments and kind of look back to the past and a then and now kind of review of these past 50 years.
Well, yes, as you said, all year long, we've been celebrating our 50th anniversary. And actually, it's been a real bright spot in what otherwise has been a challenging year for many. But Gift of Life Michigan is 50 years old. We're the second oldest organ procurement organization in the nation. And actually, we were founded in 1971 by 5 transplant surgeons who came together and really thought, wouldn't it be great if we had this other entity that managed the donation side so that we could focus on our transplant patients and getting people transplanted. And it was very forward thinking, actually. And now there are 57 agencies like ours across the country. So there's been tremendous growth. We are the second oldest one to have been formed. And so we've really had a terrific year. Looking back and really appreciating all the people who came before us and wondered what their thoughts would be about how we are today and the enormous organization that we are today.
So prior to those 5 gentlemen getting together in Brighton, Michigan, they call them the Brighton Five because that's where they got together to come up with Gift of Life Michigan. What was it like before they got together and formed this organization?
So prior to the organ procurement organization being formed, transplant centers managed the donors and the organ placement within their own hospitals. And then, sometimes there were hospitals that weren't transplant centers that would have potential donors, and they would go there. And it was a very antiquated system where there was a list on a voicemail that you called every day and wrote down all the people that were on the current list. And then if you had a donor, you would call that number back and figure out what transplant center you were supposed to call. It was a telephone game, which is now a much more sophisticated computer-based matching process. But back then it was pretty small.
So there's been a lot of innovation over these past 50 years, which is what we're going to talk about. And some of these images that we've pulled together of the then and now, maybe you could walk us through some of what we've got here.
Yeah, so these individuals here on the screen are prior CEOs, all prior to me, starting with Gerda Lipkem, who is the founder. And then on her right is Tom Beiersdorf, who was the CEO that followed Gerda. And then on her left is Rich Petrowski, who followed Tom and who was my predecessor. And so I'm just the 4th CEO in this organization. And all 3 of these individuals really saw this organization through decades of change and growth. And certainly we have them to thank. And then on this picture up in the upper left-hand column is the old organ van that they used. And it drove around the state, took teams around the state, took coolers and equipment and preservation machines. And I think until it died, I'm not exactly sure what happened. And then, of course, these pictures are a little bit more modern, particularly there on the right. The kidney preservation machines that we use today have really come a long way and progressed with the technology to help us really evaluate and improve kidneys that maybe aren't quite ready for transplant. And then this on the left there is their first home, their first office, and they refer to it as the place on Platte Road. And then on the right is where we are today, a nearly 100,000 square foot facility that houses our staff, our laboratory, our ICU, and our four surgical suites where we do organ and tissue recovery. So a much, much larger facility that has allowed our continued growth.
So Gift of Life Michigan, we see the staff here, how it's grown over the years from that Platte Road location to this was just our open house at our 50th celebration that we took this picture, and the size and the growth of the staff and the role that Gift of Life Michigan has is from the point of procuring that organ, talking to the family, and then we hand it over to the transplant center. Maybe you could talk about exactly what is the scope of Gift of Life Michigan's work with these great team of people here.
So we really are the bridge between the donor and the donor family and donor hospital, and getting those organs and tissues to the transplant centers, the tissue processors, and transplant recipients. And our process really begins when an individual dies, and we either look them up on the registry and learn that they were a registered donor, or we talk to their family if they were not on the registry. And then we facilitate the process of that recovery, whether it's organ or tissue. And then making sure, particularly with organ, that we're matching those organs with the appropriate recipients using the national allocation list, and then ultimately recovery and getting those organs to those transplant centers.
So in the beginning, we had around those early days, about 52 transplants from 36 donors. Now what are we up to?
So this year has been the 9th year in a row that Gift of Life Michigan has had successive increases in the number of organ donors that we've done. And we're going to end this year at about 420, the first time we've ever gone into the 400s. So a major milestone for us. And about 1,100 organ transplants will come from that. And in addition, nearly 1,500 individual tissue donors.
Well, it's fantastic. It's inspirational work. Gift of Life Michigan is 50 years old. We're talking with Dorrie Dils, CEO of Gift of Life Michigan. If you have questions for Dorrie, please post those questions in the comments section. Up next, we're going to add Bruce Nicely to the conversation. Bruce is the Chief Clinical Officer here at Gift of Life Michigan. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon.
So Dorrie talked about a lot of innovation that's happened over the past 50 years. You're coming at this with a very specific perspective. You run our whole clinical area, and all of the people who do all of this life-saving work with you. What has made all of this growth possible?
We're all in this together, Patrick, and I think that's the mantra, both within these walls and outside this organization. It's a community collective effort to make more organs available for those who need them from tragedies we can't prevent. And that sort of is what attracted me to this field, and what keeps me here and keeps me energized is there are 106,000 people on that waiting list today who need organs to survive, and we are the bridge to make that happen. Innovation takes a lot of forms, everything from the ways we work together and with others, all the way up through technology, processes. There's a host of ways in which innovation helps us do more and do better. So I'm sure we can talk about some of those specifically, if you like.
Well, one of the big things that sets Gift of Life Michigan apart is we have our own lab and we built a surgical center. Not every organization that does this work with organ procurement has some of those things, right?
Patrick, you hit the nail on the head. Our donor hospital partners are key stakeholders in the donation process. Without the hospitals recognizing and making bringing us into those situations in which donation is a possibility, donation wouldn't move forward. However, those hospitals continue to have a primary mission of treating people and making them better and hopefully saving their lives. So it became apparent that hospitals could function a lot better if we were to have a separate designated place where organ procurement could take place. Thus was born the idea of an organ recovery center. We actually did an experimental run with that at a surgical center over in Southfield for several years. Kind of worked out the kinks, if you will. We learned what would work, what wouldn't work, and what we could change. It took all that information and knowledge and designed and constructed our own on-site organ care facility, surgical center. We have the ability to recover organs surgically here, but we also have an ICU. So we're able to move the donor after a brain death declaration occurs at the hospital. We're able to bring the donor here. You see our ICU there on the top left, and provide care in a much more controlled environment. Our staff is here. They're very familiar with the environment, of course, and it kind of takes all of the activity that's related to facilitating an organ donation out of the hospital, which is already a busy place, lets them not have to worry about that. We take it on, bring it here, and we're able to go from our ICU setting into the surgical suites you see pictured here, where the recovery of those organs will take place with skilled surgeons and our folks who will make that happen. That is truly an innovation, I believe. It has afforded us the opportunity to be more efficient with the donation process. By moving out of the hospital, have a little bit more of that control I mentioned. So definitely innovative. I think there's probably maybe 20% of the OPOs in the country now have some form of a surgical facility like this. They've definitely gained in popularity because of there's a lot of efficiency there, but it's also more cost effective to be able to have this facility on our own property. Again, that also benefits the recipients. We try to control costs because most of the transplant programs and certainly the patients have some concern about cost control and containment. We want to do our part. So everywhere we can find ways to be more efficient, we try to pursue.
It's a testimony, fantastic, Bruce, and it's a testimony to the fact that our organization and most of the OPOs are community-based, community-led, nonprofit organizations. And the leadership here, the governing board is made up of local people, and they've made this investment here in Ann Arbor in the state of Michigan for this facility to do all of this to benefit the people of the state of Michigan. So some of the innovations, I asked you this a couple of weeks ago for a project we were doing, and I was astonished. You had a list of 24 innovations that Gift of Life Michigan has been involved with. In a little bit, we're going to talk with Dr. Chris Sonnenday, who is from Michigan Medicine and the Transplant Center there. We have other transplant partners in Michigan. But tell us a little bit about some of those innovations over the past. What stuck out to you, Bruce, over these past few years?
Oh, wow, Patrick. I think clearly the surgical center sticks out, but let's talk more specifically about a couple of innovation and studies related directly to organ donation and transplant. We've certainly partnered with the University of Michigan and other transplant and research partners to find ways to move science forward. Dorrie gave a great description of the old van, and it fascinates me that the first kidney pumps were actually designed by Waters, and Waters is an electric fence company. and they designed the first kidney pumps. I think that's awesome. The Waters pumps are still certainly available today in a far different iteration because of the innovation that has gone to improving them. So a couple of examples that came to mind for me, Patrick. I think the idea of organ reconditioning after recovery is an idea that is growing and has steadily begun to improve its value. Whatever happens to the donor to lead to their death and to put them in a position to be able to donate in the first place always takes some toll on the human body. The death of the brain is the death of the individual. The body has mechanisms to try to preserve and protect. And when those fail and the patient dies and the patient then becomes a donor, we've continually looked for ways to combat the natural sequence of events that occurs with the death of the brain, excuse me. So sometimes, let's say if somebody is a victim of an accident, it's not uncommon for the circumstances of that accident to cause the patient to aspirate something into their lungs, and aspiration into the lungs means something is in there that doesn't belong there, and we more commonly know that as pneumonia. That's troubling and tricky to look at lungs that are infected and affected that way if you're looking at putting them into a patient. So the idea to take a lung that has been injured or compromised, to place it on a device where we can monitor it, perhaps administer some medications, we can manage the fluid levels and volumes, has now been proven to improve those lungs to the point that they can be safely and successfully transplanted. That technology has expanded now to other organs, liver, heart. I'm proud that we were one of the early adapters in doing some studies on ex vivo lung reconditioning. So ex vivo meaning outside the body. And we engaged with a couple of organizations who were doing that research and invested. Our team really got on board, and the rest is history. Though that is now a relatively common option for placement of lungs that otherwise really would not go anywhere. Similarly, with the University of Michigan, they had an internal study on extracorporeal support. So this is something you can think of as bypass. Many people have heard of cardiac bypass, for example. So think of it as providing artificial circulation to the body. And so with this work that the University of Michigan did and that we later partnered with them on, the idea was that we would be able to sustain a circulation in the body of someone who had died, who's brain dead, to be able to manage them hemodynamically to preserve the organs and actually improve the organ function. So that extracorporeal support model in some form also has now emerged as a leading technology to help us place more organs. So those are a couple of ones that really stick out to me, Patrick.
Well, those are exciting and fantastic. It's fascinating to hear about all of these innovations. And speaking of the University of Michigan, we're going to bring up Dr. Chris Sonnenday, who is the transplant director here at Michigan Medicine. The University of Michigan, we are very, very grateful to have right here in our backyard. We're based in Ann Arbor. We have many wonderful transplant centers we partner with, but Michigan Medicine and the transplant center here has really been involved as a research institution in the transplant arena, hasn't it, Dr. Sonnaday? Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for including me. I was going to say the reverse, actually. I think we're lucky to have Gift of Life Michigan in our town. And yes, I mean, I think transplantation as a whole is a collaborative event. Starts with the generosity of the donors and their families, requires the participation, as Bruce highlighted, of the donor hospitals, and then continues through the work that's done by the organ procurement organizations, leading to organs getting to recipients at our transplant centers. And, you know, we're lucky in the residents of Michigan are lucky. There's 6 adult transplant centers and 3 pediatric transplant centers in the state, and one of the best OPOs in the country. So I think the opportunities for synergy, really benefit all of us in terms of doing this work. And most importantly, honors the gift of donation by providing life-saving transplants to the recipients in need.
Bruce mentioned some of the ways that we've collaborated and innovated. What have been some of the things that have come to mind in your memory and in your mind of what have been some of the innovations and collaborations between Gift of Life Michigan and Michigan Medicine?
Yeah, so I would think of them in kind of 3 broad categories. I think the first is that I think one of the great responsibilities of both transplant centers and the organ procurement organizations and that collaborative relationship is to do things like we're doing today to advocate for the importance of organ donation and to help individuals and families think about themselves as potential organ donors, to have those discussions with family and loved ones, and really advocate for the impact that organ donation has. So a lot of the most productive collaborations between the transplant centers in the state and Gift of Life Michigan has been towards, promoting the creation of and then the fostering of the donor registry. We have a student organization, Wolverines for Life, on our main campus that does direct education to the academic community as well as the broader community about organ donation. I think that's highlighted on your slide here, and hosts an annual event every year called Be a Hero at the Big House that promotes blood, tissue, and organ donation, and the bone marrow registry. So I think that's a major category, is kind of promoting the importance of organ donation. I think the second category is what Bruce alluded to, and that is, I think the challenge our generation in transplantation, if you think about kind of the 50 years that we're celebrating today, the challenge of the first 50 years in transplantation has been to make transplantation a reality. It went from being literally science fiction to, now a clinical reality that we expect to be successful 90-something% of the time in our recipients. That's remarkable. I think the challenge for our generation now for the next 50 years in transplantation is really to enhance access to transplantation. And I mean that in the broadest sense. So, provide transplantation to populations and communities that have not traditionally had access to transplantation, to provide transplantation to individuals who, for medical reasons, maybe weren't thought to be candidates in the past, and to utilize more organs such that we can transplant more people. And so some of the things that Bruce highlighted, some of the new ways to preserve and study organs for transplant, I think have been really critical. I think the last area I would highlight that has benefited, our clinician scientists here at the University of Michigan in collaboration with Gift of Life is that many individuals who make the generous choice to be organ donors also agree to be donors for research. So in other words, if their organs are not able to be utilized for transplant for whatever reason, medical reasons or otherwise, those organs can sometimes be used for research in fields from everything from transplant itself to cancer biology, immunology, et cetera. And many of our investigators have benefited from that collaboration with Gift of Life Michigan by being able to use tissues and organs that were not being used for transplant for research that helps establish important, biologic pathways and other knowledge that helps us in the treatment of patients outside of the field of transplantation.
Well, these are exciting innovations. It's a continuum, clearly, the work that's been done in the past leading to this moment and now leading on to the next 50 years. And I want to come back to Dorrie, sort of full circle, and ask you, what do you see in the next 50 years for organ and tissue donation and transplantation?
Well, I think it's a couple things. first of all, and I appreciate Dr. Sonnaday's comment about access to transplant, because oftentimes people talk about our work and talk about getting rid of the list. But the truth is, the list is just a fraction of people who could actually benefit from transplant. There's over 30 million people on dialysis, for example, in the United States. And while not all of them could be candidates for transplant, many of them certainly are. And so we may be able to work on the list, but it'll never completely go away. But I think instead, what my hope is for the next 50 years is that people won't die waiting for a transplant, that an organ will become available when they need it. And it's Gift of Life Michigan's goal to, continue having more and more conversations with donor families and more individuals signed up in the organ donor registry who say yes to donation, and continue to grow the donation opportunities so that we can make more organs available for those who desperately need them.
Well, it's been an amazing 50 years of growth, and the amount of lives saved and impacted, the work that you're doing, Dr. Sonnaday, every day at Michigan Medicine at our transplant center. I would like to thank all of our guests today. Thank you to Dorrie Dils, our CEO, Bruce Nicely, Chief Clinical Officer, and to you, Dr. Sonnaday, for joining us. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us. Please forward, like, share, follow Gift of Life Michigan on social media. Learn more about organ and tissue donation at Gift of Life Michigan's website, and register at golm.org. Look for more future conversations from Gift of Life Michigan. Let's talk. Thank you for being with us. Bye-bye.